You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Next Generation first season episode, Too Short a Season. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Jason Tyler. Hey, Father.
Hello.
Folks, be sure to stick around to the end of the episode. We have more listener feedback. This is a very thoughtful one, so I think you'll enjoy hearing this feedback. So be sure to stick around for that. And also be sure to follow the secret.
The feedback is thoughtful. Okay, I thought you were saying the episode for a second. Never mind.
No. The feedback is very thoughtful. Also, folks, be sure to follow The Secrets of Star Trek in Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're on TuneIn. You can find us in your favorite podcast app or watch us on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia, where when you get there, hit the bell to get notifications, subscribe, and do all the things. So Too Short a Season. I just realized it's kind of a fun, ironic name for an episode in the first season of Star Trek The Next Generation because it was too long a season at points. But Jimmy, could you give us a recap of Too Short a Season?
This week, we get a morality play about aging and the worship of youth. Picard and the gang rock up to a planet where an elderly admiral named Mark Jameson is located. They play him a message from Karnas, the new governor of a non-Federation world that has suffered 40 years of civil war. Karnas says that dissidents on the planet have taken hostages, including the Federation ambassador, and they're demanding a Federation negotiator to secure their release. Karnas thinks Jameson is the only man who can handle it, so the Enterprise takes him to Karnas's planet. On the way there, Jameson begins experiencing medical problems, and it turns out that he's taken an alien drug to reverse his aging. It also turns out that a whole bunch of lies have been told. Karnas is lying about the dissidents taking the hostages. There are no dissidents, and Karnas took the hostages himself. He did so because he wants revenge on Jameson. 45 years ago, Karnas had taken previous hostages and demanded weapons to destroy his enemies in another faction. Jameson gave him the weapons and lied to falsify Federation records, but in the spirit of the Prime Directive, he also gave weapons to the other faction, which led to 40 years of civil war. Karnas blames Jameson for the Civil War, and Jameson blames himself too, which is why he took the age-reversing drug, so he can confront Karnas at his prime. However, when they get to the planet, the governor won't believe that the young man before him is really the elderly Jameson. Eventually, he's convinced, but not before Jameson dies in front of him due to the side effects of the drug. Afterwards, Karnas orders the hostages released, and we've had much ado about nothing. The end.
Father, what'd you think of this one?
You know, I found this episode to be very typical in many ways of the first season of Next Generation, or really showing us why that is a tough season to get through. There's a lot of dialogue in this episode with not a whole lot of action. There are a lot of things that are told to us that very little is shown. So, for example, you know, we hear about these Federation hostages, but why not show us them in captivity? Why not show us some of their suffering that's happening rather than just us having to imagine it? I think this was supposed to be a reminder of the Iran-Contra issue that was, big in the 1980s when this episode came out. But we hear about these 40 years of civil war on the planet Mordan, but we don't see the suffering that resulted from that, which would have helped to kind of, make the thing a lot more real. We've got Jameson, who in his younger years apparently had no scruples about giving weapons for these hostages to be released, but did have some scruples about following the Prime Directive as he did that. And at the end of the day, Jameson's story, above all, just made me long for an Irish beverage.
Yes. Jameson's whiskey was about the only good thing he could contribute. Jimmy, what'd you think of this one?
Oh, it's there. It has now. DC Fontana had some kind of involvement in this, and I don't remember exactly what kind of involvement it was, but normally I would expect better from DC Fontana. because she was a good writer. And I suspect that the good elements that are in this may be due to her influence, or in some measure due to her influence, because other people were involved too. But overall, it's a lot of nothing. Also they've got the some basics here of a tale that could be done well, about youth and the worship of youth, and given us a morality play about that. And that could have been fine. But, and even the basic structure of this is okay. This hostage plot, and, it's all so, poorly executed, that it like Father said, we don't see any of the hostages. In fact, I was wondering for a good chunk of the watch are the hostages even real? Because everything else has been a lie. And it's like, okay, well, they did say I went back, and at the very beginning they say the Federation ambassador is one of them. So it's like, okay, so there are some real hostages. But other than that line of dialogue, there's nothing to prove that in this episode. And it's just very poorly executed. And even for the 1980s, I'm trying to cut them slack on special effects because it was the 80s. But the makeup, the reverse aging makeup, because what they've done is they've taken a young actor and made him look like he's 90. And then they progressively age him backwards during the show. But his age makeup is very unrealistic.
Yeah.
And so I didn't like that. Also, we have the introduction of a trope in this episode. Admiral Jameson is the first Badmiral in Next Generation. He's not the first Badmiral overall in Star Trek, but he is the first time we get the Bad Admiral trope in Next Generation itself, and it will become a regular.
I think there's just too many admirals with not enough to do. I think it's kind of we just keep stumbling across these guys who don't really have like real jobs to do.
This was even the first time we see an admiral in uniform in Next Generation, actually.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's also, the Badmiral problem is also due to Gene Roddenberry's dictum that the crew has to be perfect. There cannot be any moral flaws that the crew is having to deal with. This is not Battlestar Galactica or Babylon 5. So if we're going to introduce introduce drama, we have to have characters like Admiral Jameson and Karnas, who are not part of our regular crew, come into the show, and we need someone that the captain can't just ignore or contradict, and so that leads to the Admiral problem.
Right. I'm glad they got rid of that by Deep Space Nine, which is probably why Deep Space Nine, in my opinion, is the best series. This one had a little echoes of A Private Little War from TOS, the whole idea of, arming two sides of a conflict, except in that case, it was the Klingons and the Federation. In that one was an analogy to Vietnam, apparently, or something like that. But this one had, like, I think you said, Father, the echoes of the geopolitical controversies of the 80s, where like Iran-Contra and that sort of thing. This story hung on the actor, the guest actor, really. I mean, he had the primary role in this. It wasn't Picard, it wasn't anybody else. I mean, he everything focused on him, and they spent more time with him than almost anyone else. What was the actor? I had the actor's name in front of me, but just Clayton Rohner, and apparently the director and Clayton Rohner, the Rob Bowman and Clayton were pals. So you can understand maybe why he got so much focus, but I don't think he could carry it. I thought his portrayal of the elderly admiral was kind of forced, and a little, like, the voice was weird, and I didn't buy it, especially when they had an actually elderly actress opposite him playing his wife, and the contrast was so stark. The pretending to be old versus actually living it. So I didn't buy that. But also, everybody it's very talky. There's no action. There's nothing really happening except people standing around talking to each other on view screens. And like you said, we never see the hostages. We never, nothing really. There's one scene of phasers zap, 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 and that's it. There's not much else going on.
And that's not even at the climax. They also, talking about, directing people, talking on screens and stuff, they also have this weird lighting that they do where they keep showing us Jameson with light behind his head.
Right.
And it over and over and over again in this episode, just constantly. He's half the time he's talking with the light behind his head so that his face will be in shadow, so that allegedly we're not meant to know he's gotten younger or something. And
yes.
And they can have this dramatic reveal when he steps out of the shadows. But it's just over and over and over again. And it's like, it's very clear what they're doing, because that is not a standard lighting technique for this show.
Yeah.
So it's obvious you're just hiding his face for me until you want to give me a reveal. And they do that repeatedly through the episode.
Right. Yeah. We all learned in 2020 that when you're on a Zoom call, light should be in front of you. Do not be backlit. Yeah. Yeah. That was they just kept going back to that. Well, it's like the director didn't have other gimmicks, other tricks he wanted to use. He kind of kept going back to the same tricks.
It would have been even potentially more effective if they didn't do it at all, and they just showed him getting younger scene by scene and not hiding it. And then when are people going to notice? Right.
Yeah. Like if there was a gradual thing and it's like something different here, and just have him like walk out and, stand up, or have the scene start. And it's like, make you think, does he look younger in this scene than the last? Is it different than he did in the last scene? That would be effective. I know that he's supposed to have this chronic illness that is, he'll never get better from, but we've seen older, like Leonard McCoy as 140 years old. He's only supposed to be 85.
Yeah.
Like in this era, that's not supposed to be that old. He's not creaky. Maybe it's supposed to be a result of his disease or something, but it seemed inconsistent anyway.
Yeah. A few other notes that I've got, like at a certain point, Picard offers him the con, and that's always, and I can understand offering him command as a temporary measure, as an honor to him in view of his rank. But they apparently mean it literally here. He like gets into the navigator station, and I'm going, really? This guy's an admiral and you're having him do the navigator station? That is weird.
That would be like, on an aircraft carrier, instead of the admiral, Admiral, can you take us out? And him giving the orders for how the ship, the people, having him literally take the helm in his hands and turn the wheel. There was a couple of weird things like that. Like the, this idea that, okay, so he's the only one who can negotiate this hostage release. Okay, sure. But he tells Picard, I must be the senior mission officer. That means you'll be in command of the ship, but I'll be making all the other decisions about the mission. I'm like, well, yeah, that's how that works when you have an admiral who has to come aboard to execute a mission.
Yeah,
the captain,
he slaps
of a ship.
He slaps Picard down as soon as he gets on the ship, and Picard is looking like, I don't know how I feel about this, but he goes along with it. I thought if this were a competently written script, once we start learning about Jameson, and that, okay, this is all a revenge plot to get him. Once they learn that ought to disqualify him as being the mission officer. And then it turns out he's medically compromised too.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's like, okay, Picard, you've got a duty to Starfleet, and you ought to be saying, I'm sorry, Admiral, but I'm relieving you of this senior mission officer thing, because you are too personally involved in this, and you are not medically competent. Right.
Picard is way too passive in this, and everybody is. Dr.
Also,
Crusher.
I forgot. He also, because Jameson just admits to him, I falsified Starfleet records. Okay, now you're coming back for double dibs on you're personally involved. You falsified Starfleet records on this planet, and you're medically compromised. You're not leading this mission, sir.
Right.
And
you could have created. Go ahead.
At one point, before they beam down, they have the scene where Crusher and Troy are telling Mrs. Jameson about Admiral Jameson's condition and that he's, I forget if they said he's likely to die or whatever the situation is. But it's not really clear. And it seems like Crusher did not tell Picard about that situation, which, seems like that would be an important mission, critical piece of information that the captain of the ship would need to know.
Right. It's like this weird deference that they give him as if it's inevitable that he has to be in command, that there's no, even with all these revelations, you could have created a lot more drama. And in fact, if this were a 5th season episode, say, that would have been a lot of the drama, but the control between, Picard and the Admiral and then the, Picard having to take on this job to convince Karnas that, and all of this stuff would have probably played out very differently, probably more entertainingly.
The whole let's convince Karnas thing at the end also is a problem because it's like, I can't believe this young man in front of me is the elderly Admiral Jameson, and they have to go through a bunch of hoops to try to convince him. And I guess some of this might be because this episode came out in 1988, but they had DNA technology even in 1988. It's like
certainly on the show.
Yeah. and the writers knew about DNA technology. So they should have said, instead of playing a couple of photographs in reverse order, which could easily be faked, that should convince Karnas. They should have just said, look, I know he's younger. He's taken an alien drug. Let's do a quick DNA test and it'll show you what we mean. Right.
Scan him with your own technology to see that this is the same man. They've done that in other episodes. They did that in, I think, probably the original series where they could scan someone to tell who they are. That stuck out to me as well. So we have this whole de-aging thing that for some reason Jameson believes that the only way he can solve the situation is by being younger. And I never quite got what his reasoning was. Like he has to go to Mordan and talk to Karnas and potentially give himself up as as a sacrifice for the others. He's dying anyway. That would be a noble sacrifice if he was intending to, although Picard probably wouldn't allow it, but if he was intending to give himself up as a sacrifice, this elderly man in a wheelchair, to save the hostages. I didn't understand why he thought, oh, I need to take this drug to become a younger man so I can lead a rescue mission.
Well, it's because he's planning on physically leading the rescue mission. I mean, at least that's part of it, is he thinks we're going to beam down into these tunnels that I know about, and it's all going to be just like it was 45 years ago, and he's going to have the hostages in the same place, and so I can get the jump on him and swoop in with some Enterprise security officers and rescue them, and and that's how I'm going to solve this situation. But of course, the tunnels have been renovated since 45 years ago, and that's not where the hostages are being held. So that we get our phaser scene, but that's not even close to the climax of this thing. Right. And I can kind of, him taking the drug is one of the things that I think they could have explained better, because they make it sound like I just need to be young so I can negotiate better. I think really, given what they've shown us, him thinking he's going to go down and physically lead a rescue mission personally would be better motivation. What's interesting is that he's got this drug that you're from an alien species, and you're supposed to take it in doses slowly, and he's got enough of it for him and his wife. And it somehow will work on humans, even though it's not designed for humans. And he's been taking it a little at a time, the way you're supposed to, until he got word of this mission. And he suddenly decided, I'm going to take not only the rest of my dose, I'm going to take my wife's dose too. which is a very interesting character decision. I mean, he hadn't even told her about this drug, but then he does admit, I had a batch for you too, and I took both batches. So at least at the moment, he does later tell her, I can get another batch for you, but he didn't tell her that initially. And that makes him come off as really creepy. Not only am I experimenting with myself here, but I just consumed your chance of immortality too.
And she says, you didn't even ask me if I wanted to, like his assumption that this is something she would want to do. And maybe I don't want to take a fountain of youth drug.
Experimental, non-human, high risk of failure. Because he says that the chances of failure are high with this drug. Yeah. Maybe I don't want to take an experimental, non-human, anti-aging drug with a high risk of failure.
Right. It was. I mean, he's not heroic in any way. He's kind of tragic, and he's kind of he's a bad guy. He's like, as you enumerated, Jimmy, he's violated several laws, broke several laws, and violated his oath, and continues to do so throughout this. He's just this. He's a bad guy. He's not the hero, and it's this weird. It makes the episode feel strange because you kind of think, well, he's a Starfleet admiral. He's trying to save people, but he's kind of does his means is really bad. It's for the good end that he's trying to accomplish, I suppose. So yeah, it just gives this weird feeling throughout. I don't know how else to say that. It's just like you have this weird vibe going throughout this episode about this guy who is constantly on screen, and that's the thing is you don't get all of our main characters are reacting to him, but he's the main character of this episode. Really, everything revolves around him. Picard does, at one point, to his credit, ask the obvious question: why do you have to be young to negotiate hostage release? This was before Jameson reveals it's because I want to lead a rescue mission as opposed to negotiate. Because Jameson knows that he's not going to negotiate. That's not what he's been called there.
Well, he learns that as at a certain point. He initially doesn't know that.
I think he suspects, maybe.
He suspects it, but then he gets on the phone and verifies with Karnas that there are no dissidents.
Yeah. The Karnas himself is kind of on the nose. Like right from the beginning, you see him on screen. He's got these giant falcon statues in front of him. He's got weapons mounted on the wall behind him. So, it screams warlord, bad guy.
And he's got a distracted name because it's one consonant different from Karnak, the major temple complex in Egypt.
It also reminds me of the Johnny Carson, Karnak the Magnificent. There was an interesting question. Would it have been better for Jameson to arm only Karnas for a quick victory in Decades of Peace? That's sort of what Karnas says. Like, if you had just armed me, then we could have quickly defeated all of my enemies, and then the intervening 45 years would not have been filled with civil war, but with peace imposed by my victory. Would that been any better?
Well, we don't know. It depends. We don't know anything about his enemies. We're never told about them. Karnas doesn't even come out with a good story about who these dissidents are. What are they dissident about? What are they objecting to? We don't know anything about the other side. This is all just focused on Karnas and Jameson, and they don't care about the hostages, and they don't care about the dissidents, and they don't care about the faction that Karnas eventually defeated. We don't know anything about this, so we have no way of judging it.
Right.
But it just goes to show, since it was the Prime Directive that motivated all this, that the Prime Directive is irrational and frequently leads to unethical situations.
Yes. Well, and Picard, points out that Karnas is not simply a victim here either. He chose to fight for 40 years rather than negotiate for peace at some point. That he chose, I'm not going to, negotiate if I can have a victory. So I'll just keep fighting and fighting until millions are dead. That sort of a little too resonant with current events, so I won't go there too much into that. But there is that what should have Jameson have done in the original hostage negotiation, and maybe if he'd been a better negotiator, if he'd been Picard there, for instance, instead of Jameson, maybe he would have been able to negotiate a hostage release without arming the bad guys or arming the combatants without making a judgment on whether they're good or bad. But we won't, but like you said, we'd never know because we don't have enough information anyway. There was that weird moment where they're going to beam down for the rescue mission, and there's this odd exchange. It's Jameson's there, there's Worf, Tasha, who both of them make sense to be there.
And they finally get lines in this episode, so they get paid.
Other people finally get things to say. Geordi is there for some reason, and
Data.
Who else? Data goes, of course. And then Picard says, well, I'm going too. Why? I don't know. So you're going down on this hostage rescue mission into the middle, probably of combat, and you're sending the admiral and the captain. Oh, that makes sense. Anyway, that seemed a little hard to believe. But we had to have Picard there at the final confrontation, so that was the way of getting there, I guess. Let's see. Jameson dies at the end, as he should, I think, in the sense of if you're trying to have a morality play about the bad actions, the guy who caused all the bad things and put everyone in this bad situation suffers the ultimate
redemptive death.
Redemptive death, yeah, in that sense. What did you feel about his death at the end? It's
handled awkwardly because they've finally proven to Karnas that Jameson is the same guy as 45 years ago. And the way they do it is just dumb. They apparently made they both have what they refer to as a blood cut, which is apparently they did some blood brother ritual where they both cut their wrists, and they've still got scars from that, which they shouldn't have, in the 24th century, and maybe not even in the 21st. But that's the thing that finally convinces Karnas. And then he says, then die by your own weapon, because he's focused on his revenge and he's about to phaser Karnas and kill him. And then he says, he just puts the weapon away and says, no, my revenge shall be seeing you live like this, because he's having these horrible spasms and stuff from the side effects of the drug. And it's just too quick a pivot. It's clear that the writers want him to die from the drug, not being killed in some other way. But they've also written Karnas so that he's so revenge focused that it wouldn't make sense, or they think it wouldn't make sense, if he just gave up on his revenge and let him die. And so they have this awkward attempt to balance the two things.
Yeah, it is an awkward moment at the end there. Anything else to say about this one, Father? Any other notes?
Nope. I think we covered it.
Pretty.
How about you, Jimmy? Yeah, it is. I honestly, I didn't remember when I saw the actor in the screenshot. I'm like, oh, it's that one, but I didn't really remember it otherwise. Since for a bit, I thought it was the one with the conspiracy with the elderly admiral who. Oh no.
That one's
knocks around Riker.
Yeah. That's also a fun scene. This also isn't the only age-related super agent thing we're going to get in the first couple of seasons. We've got another one coming up next season with Dr. Pulaski.
Yeah.
Right. Poor Dr. Pulaski. So poorly written.
Yeah.
All right. So, Jimmy, did you have any other notes?
Nope.
I forget if I mentioned. Okay. So that will do it for our discussion of too short a season, too long an episode. So let's move on to our listener feedback. And this relates to our discussion of the previous Next Generation.
Dom, you said you wanted to mention the Leonard Maislish interference in this episode.
Yes, because it's fascinating. It's not really about this story in this episode itself, but it's a fascinating behind the scenes moment. So Gene Roddenberry had this attorney, Leonard Maislish, who, the attorneys have to look at everything. So they to make sure that they're not violating, somebody's rights or whatever. So this attorney would get these scripts in the first season, and he's supposed to approve them and pass them on. But he was rewriting episodes. He was inserting changing lines, inserting whole scenes, deleting scenes, like rewriting, and then claiming it was Roddenberry who apparently was for the Code of Honor in this episode, and apparently Roddenberry was away or something like that.
Roddenberry was drunk a lot of the time at this point.
Yeah, I think Memory Alpha is being a little bit kind to Roddenberry on that. And so eventually Rick Berman, who was the supervising producer at the time, he eventually became in charge of all of Star Trek, confronted Maislish and Roddenberry, along with the other producers like Robert Justman, and sent him, a demand, and basically said, if like DC Fontana is well within her rights to go to the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, the Writers Union, and file a lawsuit against Roddenberry, Maislish, and Paramount for a violation of her rights as a writer. For him, he as a lawyer, he has no role in editing her scripts, changing her scripts. Producers can, the showrunner can, but not the lawyer. And so, they confronted him, and he finally had to back down. And apparently Robert Justman, according to Memory Alpha, called Maislish personally and ripped him up one side and down the other for having the gall to insert his own material in a script. I can imagine that Maislish must have thought of himself as like a frustrated screenwriter of some sort and wanted to insert things, because apparently he thought Wesley should have a lot more role in the show and all that sort of stuff. So I just think it's kind of a fascinating little behind the scenes of what was going on at the very beginning of Next Gen. And the chaos that was really behind the scenes.
And if you want to know more about that, there's a documentary called Chaos on the Bridge, all about Leonard Maislish and the problems he caused and the other problems at the beginning of Next Gen.
Yeah, I think it narrated by Shatner. Yes, I recall, which is awesome. That was fun. I think it was on Netflix. I think I saw that. You might check there, but yeah, it's streaming. So I just thought it was an interesting little bit, and probably I don't think any of Maislish's changes got into the script. Maybe it would have been for the better, but it's kind of interesting. Code of Honor and this one were both not very good, and results. And I wonder if the meddling may have just made things harder to make a better story in the general.
Also, Gene Roddenberry's constant interference did not improve things. Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of why the show got better after into somewhere in the second seasons, because Roddenberry had less of a role. It's sad to say. All right. So, okay. Thank you for reminding me. So with that said, we should move on to our feedback. And like I said, this feedback refers back to our last discussion of a TNG episode, The Price. And Brett sent in an email. He said, it's been mentioned many times that Deanna Troi has a tendency to perceive things that do not make a lot of sense with her abilities. A few weeks ago, Jimmy mentioned her perception that someone was being deceptive, which is not how reading emotions should work. Well, I think your criticisms of how the writers present this is correct. I think there is an answer. Many times we state things as a fact when they are actually based on many different perceptions. For example, we might say, that person is intoxicated, when in reality, we're merely perceiving many different actions, which, when taken together, makes us believe the person is intoxicated, acting belligerent, stumbling in their walk, slurring speech, etc. I deal with this a lot in the law. A witness cannot say he was drunk or she was angry. Instead, the witness is supposed to say what he or she perceived that draws such a conclusion. This could be how Deanna is also speaking. Deanna might be sensing emotions of fear mixed with trepidation, mixed with a small amount of guilt, etc. And based on her training, knowledge, and experience, it could be that a particular combination of emotions leads her to believe someone is lying. While this is not what she says, she would be speaking in the same way that many of us do. So certain emotions in the right amount would have her sense or feel deception on the part of another. Same with us. Certain actions in the right amount would have us perceive intoxication, even though we do not perceive with our eyes the person's blood alcohol content. In reality, it is just sloppy writing, but it is consistent with how we sometimes speak. Thanks for everything you do and for the great entertainment.
Well, I agree with you. It's bad writing. and if I were writing it as well, if I were writing it instead of the people who did, I would focus on, even if I didn't say it every time, I'd at least slip in a scene where Deanna explains what she's actually picking up on, and that's just kind of a shorthand summary to say it quickly.
And I think they kind of do that later on in her. I think they get better at not having her just like, I sense deception, but she gets a little more nuanced in how she talks about what she's perceiving as an empath. So that's my sense of it anyway, but maybe I'm just reading with rose-colored glasses.
I mean, they could have even had another character on the show asking you sense deception. What do you mean by that? Or how exactly is that? And then she could break it down. Oh, there's a little bit of guilt. There's a little bit of, nervousness. There's, whatever else. And
with just a couple lines, but it would be, Picard would quiz her. Yeah.
And that would create a plot opportunity to bring on a total sociopath who isn't afraid and doesn't feel guilty about their lie-in.
Right.
Now that would have been, that's an interesting story. Excellent. Well, thank you, Brett, for your feedback. We really do appreciate it. And now we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Star Trek, including Rose P., Harry R., Layla L., Christopher N., and Kristen R. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. And you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So that's it from us. What did you think of Too Short a Season? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek or our Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. Send an email to trek@sqpn.com. Visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. Or you can, as I said before, watch The Secrets of Star Trek on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the Deep Space Nine episode, Dramatis Personae. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing The Secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, and live long and prosper.
Father Jason Tyler, thank you as well.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest, and remember, the quest for youth, #1, so futile. Age and wisdom have their graces too.